A lovely and peaceful village once existed, tucked away in the serene beauty of the natural world. Charles, a modest and naive lad by nature, was an ambitious and hard-working boy who lived in that village. Therefore, everyone wants to be with him. Charles had many wealthy and successful friends, but he never felt envious of their success. By the way, Charles's hard work habits allowed him to be moderately successful in life, but most of the time he felt aimless and unsure of what his mission in life was. He didn't feel like he had a clear direction in life. He was just going through the motions. He occasionally thought that his life was useless and that there was nothing he could do about it. Charles therefore made the decision one day to stroll to his village's lovely adjacent river in an attempt to change his views. As he sat beneath a lovely tree by the river, it occurred to him that his life would be in vain if he didn't discover beforehand what he needed to accomplish and why he was here. He was unable to sit quietly because of a flurry of pointless and unsettling ideas racing through his head. Simultaneously, he recalled that a former school classmate had informed him about a renowned Buddhist monk who had lived with his followers in a monastery amidst the tall mountains. The Buddhist monk's extensive and profound knowledge made him well known in the surrounding villages and cities. The well-known feature about that Buddhist monk was that whenever a distressed person would show up in front of him, the monk would utilize his divine ability to know all of the man's sorrows, aches, and problems before the person had a chance to speak to him. The route to the monastery of that divine Buddhist monk was fraught with many different kinds of challenges, since travelers would frequently be robbed and occasionally killed by robbers and bandits. It was for this reason that nobody dared to go there. Everyone would consider their options carefully before visiting the Buddhist monk as a result. When Charles finally arrived at the monastery after much anxiety and struggle, he saw that the monk was seated alone and fully engrossed in his profound concentration. When he gets there, Charles sits down and waits for the master to open his eyes. The Buddhist monk opens his eyes to see Charles seated in front of him. The monk then asks Charles to explain his issue. Charles confided in the master about all of his issues and hardships on this. He tells the teacher, "Sir, nothing in my life is going smoothly. Even if many of my friends are successful in life, I'm still unsure about what I should do with my own. I feel as though I'm lost in life's ocean. I feel like there is no meaning to my life. Charles, my child, in this world when one who knows what to do in his life understands that he has become successful in his life," the Buddhist monk adds with a kind smile after hearing this, "Charles, every buddy of yours has achieved success in life. Could you tell why? Since your pals are all aware of what has to be done. Therefore, if you must know the meaning of your existence, take some time to reflect and ask yourself what your true desires are when sitting alone. What exactly qualifies as fulfilling employment that fulfills your soul? When you pursue activities that bring you joy and happiness and increase your sense of fulfillment and contentment, your life's true purpose will begin to reveal itself to you naturally." The Buddhist monk then leads Charles to the bank of a river where he shows him some kids. Those kids were playing and having an amazing time. They were now smiling, playing, and savoring every second of their lives. Charles hoped he could share their carefree attitude and couldn't help but feel envious of them. Charles was suddenly approached by a toddler who said, "Hey, mister, why do you look so sad?" The child's inquiry then surprised Charles, but he chose to answer him honestly. So he opened out to him about the real him. He confided in the little boy that he was struggling to find his life's purpose and that this was dragging him down. The young person turned to face him and replied, "I know that I'm here to have fun, be happy, and make the most of every moment, even though I don't know what my purpose in life is yet. Perhaps that's all that's truly required of us. Charles was astonished by the child's intelligence and thought process. He came to the realization that he had neglected to appreciate life's journey because he had been so preoccupied with discovering his mission. He made the decision to change after beginning to view life in a different way. Charles now began to pursue his happy pursuits, which included painting, hiking, and spending time with his loved ones. He has now begun to volunteer at a nearby charity in order to aid others. He discovered that by engaging in activities that made him happy and joyful, he felt more satisfied and fulfilled on the inside. Following this momentous event, Charles understood why the Buddhist monk had brought him to this place. The Buddhist monk then addresses Charles, saying, "Charles, my child, life is about the journey, not the destination, and the most important thing is to enjoy every moment of life along the way. Charles, you can make anything or anything function as your life's mission. For example, daily contemplation is necessary if you wish to become anything. You will need to put in a lot of effort day and night to achieve it. Simply thinking about it won't cut it. Nothing can prevent you from achieving your peers' levels of success once you discover your life's mission." Following this, the monk addressed Charles, saying, "You have no idea how many people in this world fail in life simply because they are unaware of their own purpose, and then they continue to hold other people responsible for their own failures. For this reason, determining our life's purpose is crucial. Having a purpose in life gives our lives significance, and it also makes things simpler when we know what has to be done and accomplish it. Sometimes our life's mission takes precedence above all other objectives. You are the true captain of the ship that is your life. Therefore, constantly be aware of what is going on in it." Following this, the Buddhist monk welcomes Charles back to the monastery and wishes him luck in discovering his life's mission. Charles graciously expresses his gratitude to the master for using his extensive knowledge and expertise to show him the way. Charles was now experiencing a fresh sense of awakening and optimism. The monk showed Charles the way of self-salvation before closing his eyes once more and entering a profound state of concentration. Charles expressed his gratitude to the monk with a heartfelt bow before making his way back. Charles had now discovered the real meaning and purpose of his existence. Charles's life began to take form as time went on. He came to realize that his mission was to change the world for the better and assist others in whatever manner he could. He began working toward this objective every day, and it gave him a sense of contentment and purpose that he had never had. Charles ultimately came to the realization that his purpose was something he could make for himself, rather than something he had to discover. He discovered that living is all about the journey, not the goal, and that savoring each moment of life as it unfolds is what matters most. Charles lived his life with passion and purpose after that day. Following his return from the Buddhist monastery, he started encouraging others to follow in his footsteps and turned into a shining example of how a small shift in perspective can result in a meaningful and purposeful life. Those who had mocked Charles for not knowing what to do with his life could now plainly see that he had undergone a significant transformation. Now, a great number of people from Charles's village began approaching him with their life's issues, and Charles quickly used the information he had picked up from that Buddhist monk to assist those individuals find solutions to their difficulties. People started approaching Charles for advice from different places after hearing his inspirational narrative about how he went from being a guy without a purpose in life to one with one. Charles was now a living example of motivation and support for others. So, my dear friends, never forget that life's purpose is a journey of self-discovery rather than a destination. Accept your interests, challenges, and adventures. Take chances, follow your interests and abilities, and never forget that everything else will fall into place after you've discovered your life's purpose.